There will be no prizes for predicting the focus of this morning's programme, but there will be penalties and punishments for any attempts to cast it in a sort of triumphalist or victorious way, having Boris Johnson's closest advisor confirm the harshest critiques of Boris Johnson must rank among one of the most horrible things in the context of the thousands upon thousands of unnecessary deaths described yesterday. One of the hollowest and bleakest validations ever. Could you imagine being proved right about Boris Johnson in almost every way by the man who propelled him not only over the Brexit finish line but into Downing Street itself, and having that proof built upon the deaths of tens of thousands of people who would still be with us today. I should warn you, 4 minutes after 10 is the time, we will not be flinching this morning away from the facts of the matter, and the most important facts of this matter remain those deaths. And I've been conscious since the beginning of this nightmare about the dangers of an unleavened diet of death and horror, but today we're going all in on it, because it is absolutely unbelievable. Stuff that we could predict with confidence. Suddenly it's all right to talk about Brexit again. All the people that have been telling us to move on and not talk about Brexit, pretending that Cummings being a snake over that somehow undermines his testimony yesterday. I said it to you yesterday, I'll say it to you again today. If he said anything yesterday that was wrong, dishonest or refutable, then it would already have been refuted. You will today get people like Matt Hancock standing up and saying, no, absolute nonsense. But any attempts to cast Cummings as some sort of saintly figure in this mess is, well, patently ridiculous. He bears more responsibility for Boris Johnson's presence in Downing Street than anybody else in the country. So for him to turn around and describe Boris Johnson as completely unfit for purpose, although it's true, it clearly casts him in the role as I mean, why would you be a kingmaker when the king that you were making was so rancid? And I can't. I mean, you know, nobody went deeper on the rock versus hard place choice at the December 2019 election, but I'm not interested in hearing, at least he'd have been better than Jeremy Corbyn either. No one will ever know that for certain. And the amount of time that's passed since that choice was presented to the country, that tragic, pitiful, pathetic choice was presented to the country, there's enough water under the bridge now for it no longer really to be relevant or helpful. Not that, of course, will stop lots of people from trying to relitigate that particular battle. 6 minutes after 10 is the time. No winners, that's the point. That's why I have no sense of vindication this morning, no sense of validation. The weirdest experience of my professional life, perhaps, yesterday was watching the Prime Minister's closest advisor, most senior advisor. And there were times when it sounded like one of my interminable monologues, his description of what was going on in British politics and in Downing Street. I'm clinging to the notion that Matt Hancock's the only one of them that's got a conscience, but Matt Hancock, of course, emerged from Dominic Cummings' testimony yesterday more damaged, potentially, than any other politician. I've seen some suggestions that that might have had something to do with Brexit loyalties, but, you know, I see Brexit almost everywhere. I'm like the kid in The Sixth Sense with dead people, but I don't know that Brexit has played a part in this. Something happened. I don't know whether Hancock nicked his sandwiches or something like that, but quite an incredible assassination of his character. And yet, to me, he remains the only one who's looked at times as if he had a conscience. But, of course, I could have got that wrong. So, I'm going to say to you probably 100 times between now and 1 o'clock, or 12 o'clock. Hopefully we'll be able to do Mystery Hour, otherwise Keith might resign. There are no winners here. We are all losers. That's what I find so incredible about the attempt to impose some sort of retrospective analysis on it. We've spent, haven't we, since 2015, we really have turned ourselves into two tribes who go to war. And it was largely built on Brexit to start with. Now it's become a really weird kind of fake culture war or left versus right. It's still built upon those foundations. And the idea is that you either celebrate a victory or, more often, it seems to me, you're supposed to revel in the discomfort of your rivals. So, tell me again how delicious those liberal tears are when you learn that the man you put into Downing Street was responsible, through the absence of clarity and leadership, for tens of thousands of unnecessary deaths. Oh, I love it, because it upsets people like you and Sadiq Khan, James. Really? Has that little bit of bonkersness broken yet? The idea that it winds up lefties when Boris Johnson wins things. But, of course, when Boris Johnson wins things, he ends up in charge of our response to a global pandemic. And there it is. Tens of thousands of unnecessary deaths. 9 minutes after 10 is the time. I mean, I'm interested in what you think, but I really mean think. I'm sorry if this leaves you feeling a little bit alienated. I'm not interested in how loudly you can bellow your support for a position that you held before Dominic Cummings opened his mouth yesterday. Sorry, it needs to be something that involves a slight shift of needle, a slight movement of pendulum. I'm genuinely heartbroken by the confirmation of our worst fears. And that's not good radio. I should be banging drums today, shouting things from the rooftops, pretending to believe something because it hurts the other side. I'm just heartbroken. I'm absolutely heartbroken. How many times have we sat here over the last 18 months and said, I almost hope that there's a sinister master plan in place, because the alternative is abject chaos presided over by people who do not know what they are playing at or what they are doing. How many times have we said that? How many times have I looked you in the eye, metaphorically speaking, all right, don't at me, and said, I almost hope that there is a flesh-coloured body stocking. I hope the Emperor isn't as naked as he appears to me and to many of you to be. Because if he is that naked and so many people are still cheering his magnificent robes, then what hope is there for our country? And how bad, how catastrophic will things have to get before scales fall from eyes on the sort of level that is needed? And now we've got our answer. 130,000 dead. God only knows how many of them would still be with us if we'd had a decent Prime Minister, if we'd had decent leadership in place. And the invitation to you today, thankfully, and this isn't, as I mentioned a moment ago, this isn't going to be a daily occurrence. The Sun inevitably has kind of tried to turn it all into a joke. Tens of thousands of unnecessary deaths, and the Sun are doing an eye test joke on their front page. But the Mail, and I say this with a degree of reluctance, but the Mail have called it absolutely right. They say, as I did, he should have gone over Barnard Castle, but that the evidence he gave yesterday, if it's not true, they would probably already have proved it. So you're just going to be encouraged to tie that scarf a little bit tighter around your neck, if that's even possible. Keep cheering for Boris Johnson, even after the man that put him there, the man that presided over it, presided over the Brexit victory and over the last election victory, not so much the leadership election that saw him eclipse Rory Stewart, who really is the godfather of I Told You So, I think, at the moment. Rory Stewart calling almost every angle, calling almost every step on this path correctly, as long ago as March of 2020, early March, possibly even February. I'll dig that clip out for you. Quite incredible. But, of course, as Rory Stewart explained to us at the time, it was his experience with Ebola. It was his experience as an international aid minister that had equipped him with the knowledge he needed to know how a country like this should respond to a threat like COVID-19. Quite incredible. No winners. That's the weirdest thing, and that is why, it's obviously not the most important element of today's pontifications, but that is why it is not a recipe for a zinger of a radio phone-in. I don't want to row with you today if you're still pretending that this isn't just a national tragedy. I don't want to argue with you. I just pity you, to be honest, if you're still in a place where you'd ring in and go, oh, you trust him now, do you? or, oh, he's done his best, Johnson's done his... I mean, it's just horrible what's been done to you. My heart bleeds for you. You're watching your fellow countrymen die needlessly because of the political leadership that you're still defending, and you think patriotism involves singing Rule Britannia at the last night of the proms and waving a plastic little flag when you're watching the Queen on the telly. And what the flip is patriotism if it's not protecting the lives of your fellow countrymen and women? What's the point of loving your country if you care not a jot for the people in it? I got some very interesting research recently into this ludicrous culture war, but you can see why they need it, can't you? On a day like today, you can see why they need it. Hey, your man killed thousands of us. Yeah, but, you know, flags and statues. And that's why I can't be doing with it today. I'm not going to have arguments with people who think that wrapping themselves in a flag somehow insulates them from the catastrophe visited upon the country by Boris Johnson. There are no winners. There are no winners. 14 minutes after 10 is the time. Yeah, oh, he's very bitter, Dominic Cummings. He's like a dumped boyfriend. Yeah, okay, you pretend that that's the most important takeaway from what he told you yesterday. He described what went on in the heart of power, in the nucleus of our government. He described it in ways that were completely and utterly plausible. And if they are not true, we will know. We would probably know by now. What's the worst bit? Care homes for me. Remember when we sat here playing out clips of people talking about protective rings? This is, I suspect, where the last vestiges of my defence of Matt Hancock will finally disappear and dissolve, because the care homes, man. We've put a protective ring around the care homes. No, you hadn't. Do you remember that article about, it wasn't the siege of Mafeking, it was another siege from, I think, the 19th century, where they were launching plague-ridden corpses over the castle walls in the hope of infecting the enemy inside. And there was an article in, of all places, the Daily Telegraph, comparing it, by a doctor, I should stress, not by one of their columnists or failed advisors to failed Conservative prime ministers who populate so much of their opinion pages when all the think tankers are too busy counting the money they get from secret donors. It was a doctor in the Daily Telegraph, I think, describing, comparing that policy. So 16 after 10 is the time. What is it that you take away from yesterday as an honest person? Not as someone who's been bent double by the dishonesty of politicians and journalists. You can't today pretend that what Dominic Cummings said yesterday was anything other than a national tragedy. The description of a national tragedy visited upon the nation by the man in charge, by his idiocy, by his incompetence, by his cronyism, by his cowardice, by his failures, by his character. So, I mean, second only to Boris Johnson in my personal hit list of responsibility is Dominic Cummings. So think not for a moment, and however hard people try to persuade you that you now must choose between them. We did it earlier in the week. Which of these self-obsessed narcissists are you going to believe this time? They're both despicable. But there is truth and there is untruth. And if you can hold on to the truth, even if you are the only one, you will not go mad. And that is my personal take on the situation. I don't understand completely, although I've probably got a better grasp of it than most, having written a couple of books addressing some of the key issues. I don't understand completely how we've ended up as sort of chomping tribal enemies. But I do know that nobody sensible, honest or decent would have listened to Dominic Cummings yesterday with a sense of celebration or positive triumphalist vindication. It was horrible. Being proved right has never felt so wrong, so horrible, so heartbreaking. And that's why today, just today, if you're still minded to ring up and shout about how great Boris Johnson is and you can't trust the word Dominic Cummings says, just today, I'm going to give myself a day off from that, because I just pity you so profoundly and so completely that I don't know that it would be a helpful exchange. Dave is in Birchington in Kent. Dave, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Yeah, it's just to offer an observation, something that's played on my mind for a while. With Boris being the Churchill fan that he is, he will know that the three things that the human mind holds on to over time is Churchill's remembered for winning the Second World War, smoking cigars, and doing the victory sign in pictures. But that's my perception.
By ours in 2021. I don't think that was the case in 1945, was it? When he lost an election.
What I'm saying is, with history being as it is, and the human mind holding on to three useful facts about people,
yes,
I fear that Boris will be remembered.
Oh, I see. Vaccines, Brexit. What's the other one? Babies?
Brexit, furlough, and the vaccine scheme.
You might be right.
Three things.
Oh, you might be right. Not the death toll. Not the tens of thousands of unnecessary deaths. Not the failure to... Yeah, you could be right. I mean, it's a very bleak analysis of your fellow humans. And I would remind you that in 1945, the British electorate didn't vote for Churchill in the numbers that I think retrospectively we might all expect, looking through the lens of history. But I mean, who knows? Today, Dave, I don't really care with respect. Today I'm interested only in... What am I interested in? I'm interested in whether or not... Actually, no, that's not fair to Dave. Maybe that is a really pertinent contribution, because none of this matters. There is no death toll which would overshadow the cultishness, the tribalism. There is no death toll. There is no number. There is no figure. What's that Dylan line? Isn't there a Dylan line? How many deaths? I'm probably imagining it. There's been so much coverage of Dylan over the last few days. Mate, there is no figure that would unknot that scarf, that would untie that knotted scarf around your neck, which is Conservative or Brexit or Boris Johnson colours. 0345 6060973 is the number you need. Should we run through some of the greatest hits? This, for me, it's so hard to pick the worst moments, isn't it? But I think the bleakest bit for me was the absolute confirmation that there was never any plan at all. That was the bit. I don't know how much you've listened over the last 18 months, but almost on a daily basis at one point, on a daily basis, I was bemoaning the absence of clarity and leadership, and then almost as a form of psychological self-help, self-care, we'd posit the idea, look, maybe there is some sort of plan. We just can't see it yet. Journalists were telling me right at the beginning, they are following the science, but they can't tell you what the science is because they're worried. And these are journalists who had, hotlines to Downing Street. They don't want to make other countries look bad because other countries are going to handle it differently. And they don't want to make those countries look bad, so they can't explain publicly why they're doing what they're doing. And I thought that sounds like absolute hogwash to me. But it's better than the alternative, which is that they haven't got a plan. That's why aren't they telling us what the plan is? Answer, they haven't got a plan. Well, and now we know.
So I sent a message to the Prime Minister at 7:48 that morning, and forgive the language that this is expressed in, but I might as well just say what I actually said. We've got big problems coming. The Cabinet Office is terrifyingly shit. No plans, totally behind the pace. We must announce today, not next week. If you feel ill with cold or flu, stay home. Some around the system want to delay because they haven't done the work. We must force the pace. We're looking at 100 to 500,000 deaths between optimistic and pessimistic scenarios.
Okay. Was there a plan? I really hope there's a plan, because the alternative is...
I've come through here to the... Talan Macamara said, I've come through here to the Prime Minister's office to tell you all, quote, I think we are absolutely... I think this country's heading for a disaster. I think we're going to kill thousands of people. As soon as I've been told this, I've come through to see you. It seems from the conversation that you're having that that's correct.
That was the Deputy Cabinet Secretary, Helen McNamara, fears that her colleagues, in fact, I think in this case her boss, didn't know their backsides from their proverbial elbows, were quickly confirmed.
On the 12th, on this crazy day of the 12th, we're sitting in the Prime Minister's office. The Cabinet, we're talking about the herd immunity plan. The Cabinet Secretary said, Prime Minister, you should go on TV tomorrow and explain to people the herd immunity plan and that it's like the old chickenpox parties. We need people to get this disease because that's how we get herd immunity by September. And I said, Mark, you've got to stop using this chickenpox analogy. It's not right. And he said, why? And Ben Warner said, because chickenpox is not spreading exponentially and killing hundreds of thousands of people. And you could sense in the whole room there was this kind of shock. And it was only really at that moment that we realised, and Mark, now, to stress, this wasn't some weird thing that the Cabinet Secretary had come up with. He was saying what the official advice to him from the Department of Health was.
And then the really bleak bit in the first tranche of criticism, the fact that Number 10 was an utterly planless chaos zone, because the men in charge of looking after us faced questions that you would really, really want to be answered by people possessed of reserves of compassion, empathy, honesty, integrity, decency. If you're of a religious nature, then you would want people who believe in the sanctity of human life to be in charge. Who did we have in charge? Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings. Two of the biggest liars that public life has ever produced in this country. Which is why it is not just ridiculous and dangerous and wrong, but also it's so insulting to you to suggest that you now, today, have to somehow pick a side on this. They're both despicable, but one of them's telling the truth. And they were the men charged with answering these, addressing these, solving these hideous, hideous problems.
You showed us a whiteboard picture, and one of the phrases on it that I think has caused some concern is, who do we not save? What was the answer to that?
Well, that was asking the obvious question at that point. No, at that point it was too late to stop disaster on the 13th of March, was my view, and the people who I thought, figured this out best view. So the comment on there was essentially like, we're already partly over the cliff. Like, who is not going to be saved in this situation? Like, have we figured that out? Who's most vulnerable, etc., etc., etc.
That, for me, was always the fear. As you know, if you've listened to this programme for the last few years, if we don't address the lies of 2016, if we don't address the lies at the heart of every single step of Boris Johnson's career, aided and abetted latterly by Dominic Cummings at every turn, then what the hell will they end up in charge of next? If you don't arrest the juggernaut of dishonesty, deceit, jingoism, faux nationalism, low-level racism, xenophobia and worse, if you don't lance that boil before these clowns and chancers get into Downing Street, what will they end up in charge of next? And they ended up in charge of that question. Who are we not going to save? And I would cautiously suggest that if you want to know about how honest Boris Johnson is in his concerns about people, go and have a chat with some fishermen, or some farmers, or some finance workers, or some exporters. Just go and have a chat with anybody, actually, who believed the single promise that Boris Johnson has made in the course of his life. If you can't find a fisherman, find an ex-wife. If you can't find an ex-wife, find an abandoned mistress. If you can't find an abandoned mistress, find a party leader. If you can't find a party leader, find a former employer. Even I got bored of the list of lies that Boris Johnson has lived. Even I got bored of listing it to you. But the danger, the question, the fear was always, if he gets away with that, what will he end up in charge of next? And he ended up in charge of you and yours. He ended up in charge of our lives. And how many of them have been sacrificed upon the altar of his incompetence, we will never know. I'll just read you a couple of things out there, because I'm not going to take calls from these people today for obvious reasons. I hope you enjoy your holiday and get over your nervous breakdown. Don't come back. The problem is, M in Richmond, that when you send it from your phone, it arrives with your number. So, you know, if I was a less generous soul than I am, I could perhaps do something with that. So you're supposed to set up anonymous troll accounts on Twitter with avatars of dogs and flags and things like that, you silly sausage. If you're going to be an idiot, at least remember to cover your tracks like that. And Mark in Tooting, who writes, on a day like today, I'm convinced you could do the full 3 hours without taking a call. Thank you, Mark, for your kind regards. You're absolutely right, I could. But I won't, because I want to hear from other people as well. The desperation, I guess, that you would need now to deploy to cling on to the idea that your man is anything other than an absolute ghoul, a lethal, vampiric liar, is epic. But if anybody knows how that desperation works and where that desperation leads, it's ours, isn't it? We hear it on a regular basis. And just because we won't be hearing it today doesn't mean that we are under any illusions about how powerful it is, what a heady brew it is. Oh, yes. I love it. I love it. Tens of thousands of unnecessary deaths. I love it, James, because it upsets people like you and Sadiq Khan. 0345 606 0973 is the number you need if you want to join in. Talia is in Mousehole in Cornwall, which I think I just pronounced correctly. Talia.
You did. Yes.
I shouldn't. I don't want to pronounce it correctly because when I was a kid and I went there on holiday, I thought it was the coolest place name in the history of place names. But I didn't say Mousehole, so here we are. What would you like to contribute to the programme today?
Well, I'm in Mousehole and I'm actually in fishing and farming territory. You're just talking about that as well.
Oh, God.
When I heard Boris speaking back in March last year, I remember, in fact, you were quite in, well, you started me off in my journey.
Pardon?
Because I was listening to your radio show. I was listening to your show.
Yes.
I was getting so sick to the back teeth. My friend is a nurse.
Could you not have just put on Classic FM? Could you not have just put on Classic FM? You didn't have to undertake any major life changes, did you, as a result of that?
No, for some reason, LBC, but I was listening. I was incredulous about what was going on. I took my kids out of school before the lockdown. I wrote to my gym saying, why on earth are you open? Everyone could see what was happening. That's why comments like he thought it was swine flu. I mean,
it's incredible, right?
Those pictures of Italy on the television will go to me to my grave. And, my friend is a matron. People in her hospital died. I was so worried, and I just thought, I can't sit back and do nothing. So I started a journey. I started to become a counsellor. I am now a counsellor for Cornwall.
Oh, wow.
Because I just
a political counsellor, as opposed to a psychological counsellor.
I'm a political counsellor. I'm
probably
a
do a bit of both.
and a unitary counsellor. But because I want to change politics, and I thought if I don't change it from the bottom up and people start coming into this with the right values and integrity, it is so dangerous when people like him are in charge, because the out of touchness, just that, even the thing about yesterday where he said, or somebody said about, we didn't think people would wear masks. I mean, people needed to trust. That was the one. I think government and the left, right, I think it's almost passing that. I feel like we might be in a new climate for the whole politics and everything, because I don't see it as left, right anymore. I mean, that's just not working, one end and then it's the other. And the people, I found on the doorstep, you'll never get those, the ones that are just blanket purse lips will not, you cannot get in there. But you can for 5 minutes with Conservatives. I've stood on the doorstep, had 5 minutes.
Do you know, even that word is, I know you've just alluded to this yourself, but that word's not fair either. I mean, the party of Nick Bowles or Anna Soubry or Rory Stewart, that is still the Conservative Party. It's just not the Boris Johnson party. And there'll be plenty of people who are as... I mean, that's, again, we don't want to go back to the rock and a hard place election, do we? But the idea that Rory Stewart... It's
weakness. It's weakness. And I couldn't campaign, because I'm in fishing and farming territory, I couldn't campaign and say... I didn't say, in fact, I said, I'm not going to tell you which party to vote for, I just want people to vote. I want more people to be active in voting.
What did you take away yesterday? What were your big...
The big things were I followed this all the way through, and you knew at some point he was going to come out and do that, and I don't really want to talk about Cummings particularly, but I just think it's we've got to start playing to our better angels, I think, just like Biden says in a way. I think people out there, actually, they do know, most people know, but what scares me so much is that people I really care about, and I think do care, and when I talk to them about my friend and being so worried genuinely, and I think they do understand. I think they're so switched out, but the media they just believe things they see too much and don't look underneath a headline. And all I kept saying in my leaflets, everything I sent out was it's just weakness in politics. We don't need people that can't cancel Christmas. We just can't have people like that anymore. You need
that's just the weirdest. Yes, it's the contradiction at the heart of so-called populism, isn't it? That it's inadequacy. It's inadequate cowards masquerading as so-called strongmen. Johnson terrified of taking difficult decisions, and Cummings, for all his attempts at retrospective self-hagiography, Cummings obviously didn't have the skills to persuade him to do so.
Every single thing you saw, I just thought, now they're weighing up the options of what's going to make them least popular. You know, just they're weighing it up in terms. And I see that with some conservative ways of styles, but I did particularly with that. I just thought everything is about whether they're going to lose the popular vote. And I thought this is people's lives, and I had to get up there and start doing something, because it wouldn't matter if it's normal day to day. Governments come and go, and they're just a bit good or a bit bad.
No, this is different.
Like
Just look at America. I look at what happened on January the 6th. This is a con job. This is a cult of personality so complete that it is not beyond the realms of possibility that Boris Johnson's stands will behave like Donald Trump's stands did and try to overthrow democracy while baying for the blood of his appointed vice president. That's not an exaggeration. I mean, I don't know how many people there are in that category, but there are plenty of people who see Johnson and Trump as sort of twin lodestars. Talia, I'm incredibly proud to know that I played a part in inspiring you to go into local politics. I really am. Thank you. 10:41 is the time. Mentioning Conservatives, mentioning the... I mean, I'm pretty sure that by 11 o'clock today, particularly when we've heard his attempt in the House of Commons in the last few minutes to defend himself from some of the accusations, I'm going to have to row back completely from my support last year for Matt Hancock. I think that is going to be a big... Luckily, I'll be able to use it as an opportunity to plug my book, How Not to Be Wrong, because the first thing you have to do is admit it when you are. But I'll tell you why I retained warmth for Matt Hancock, and it's a very human explanation. I retained warmth for Matt Hancock because I didn't want to believe that every single one of them was a sociopath. I don't know about Dominic Cummings anymore. I felt the wobble in his voice yesterday, and some of the remorse that he expressed at least sounded sincere, but people believed that he was sounding sincere when he lied about his trip to Barnard Castle. So maybe this is my time to be mugged, to be misled, to be duped. But I just saw Hancock, and I saw someone who looked a little bit less polished than the rest of them, a little bit less privileged perhaps, a little bit less to the manner born, and I don't know why. I just needed to cling to the idea that at least one of the people on the boat was not going to be doing more to hold it below the waterline than keep it sailing towards the horizon. It's almost certain now that I was completely and utterly wrong. But we shall have to wait and see. Speaking of Conservatives, though, and I do think this is important, we're not a totalitarian state. You have to recognise that the 21 MPs, I think, culled by Dominic Cummings. This is the bit that is so frustrating. You know, he created the party that allowed Johnson to do what he did. He played a bigger role than almost anybody else in corrupting objective truth and culling members of Parliament that understood the reality of what Brexit was almost certain to be. So in a desperate attempt to deny reality, he slung them all out of the House of Commons, not least this man speaking right at the beginning of the national nightmare.
It's deeply, deeply unfair and I think irresponsible to say this is all the fault of the Chief Medical Officer. This was the strategy he chose. He did not choose that strategy. His job is to advise the government. The Prime Minister's job is to choose the strategy. And I believe it is patently clear from all the way around the world that we need to act today. Today.
And when you say act, could you just elaborate on what that means?
Yeah.
Shutting schools?
Yeah. So, we are going to shut schools. The government doesn't want to shut schools, but we're going to shut schools. And the Easter holiday's coming. So why wait 2 weeks? Why not shut them now? Number 2, gatherings need to stop. Number 3, people need to start self-isolating. They need to start working from home. It's a huge thing. I understand this. I have a 2-year-old nursery. I have a 5-year-old in school. It poses a huge burden on the family when you do that, and many other people in much more difficult situations. I understand that. But this is literally the most serious epidemic that we have faced since the end of the First World War.
And he was just right. And you couldn't prove that he was right at the time, but the idea that because he was a Remainer or because he'd lost the leadership election to Johnson or because he wasn't in Parliament anymore, on one side of politics, on the other side of politics, the other extremity, because he followed the whip, he voted with the whip on austerity policies, because he didn't, he voted with the Conservative Party on austerity issues and ideological issues that many of us don't find attractive. So it couldn't be trusted. That is footballification. Don't look at the colour of the shirt that the player is wearing. Look at the play, the tactics, the skills they've demonstrated on the pitch. And that's why, it's almost encouraging that the Daily Mail have done it, but the Murdoch lot will be piling in the opposite direction, somehow seeking to continue the footballification. It's not about the facts, it's not about the evidence, it's not about the numbers, it's not about the statistics, it's all about team loyalties. And we'll find out shortly how Matt Hancock has attempted to wriggle off, how successfully perhaps he has wriggled off this particularly pungent hook that Dominic Cummings hung him on yesterday. They won't treat this like a game, will they? They won't turn this into a football match where it's not what happens on the pitch, but it's what the colour of your scarf is that concerns you the most. They won't allow the explanation of how tens of thousands of unnecessary deaths were caused by an absence of clarity and leadership in Boris Johnson's Downing Street, will they? Not this. And I speak of politicians, I speak of people in my profession, and I speak, of course, of punters as well, members of the great British public. Surely this will be a moment. Nah, not a chance. Someone called Dehenna Davidson, the Conservative MP for Bishop Auckland, has a Barnard Castle eye test graph in the background during her appearance on Cabinet Office questions. That's from a tweet that I've just seen by the PA, the Press Association's parliamentary editor. On what level? Look, if it was an accident and she forgot it was there, then the next 30 seconds of fulmination can be scrapped, can be wiped from the tape. But on what possible planet do you think, oh, I know, I'll put something funny in the background the day after the Prime Minister's most senior advisor has explained how they caused tens of thousands of unnecessary deaths? I don't understand. I genuinely don't understand the mental process there. Just have a blank wall. Don't have anything up. By all means, be a bit callous. Block every ball that's thrown at you. But how? How can you think, I know what I'll do. I'll put a Barnard Castle eye test up in the background, yeah? In the place where I normally have the flag. That's just ghoulish. Ghoulish and gross. But as I say, if it's an accident or a mistake, or if the tweet from the parliamentary editor of the Press Association is in some sense misrepresentative, then ignore everything that I have just said. 10:51 is the time. Theo will join us shortly to have a little look at Matt Hancock's attempt to get off the hook. Let's remind ourselves before Theo joins us of just how big that hook is. I refer you once again to Dominic Cummings' testimony yesterday to that joint select committee. And listen, I've written a whole book about being able to admit when you're wrong. I've explained why I clung to the idea that Hancock might be all right. And Dominic Cummings is not necessarily the reason to abandon the sense that Hancock was one of the only ones with a conscience. But if he was lying through his teeth throughout, which is the allegation, then obviously he wasn't deserving of any support or warm feelings, even if he was the only one in the room possessed of any semblance of a conscience. So let's just recap on some of the accusations levelled at the Secretary of State for Flags and Health yesterday.
I think there's no doubt at all that many senior people performed far, far disastrously below the standards which the country has a right to expect. I think that the Secretary of State for Health is certainly one of those people. I said repeatedly to the Prime Minister that he should be fired. So did the Cabinet Secretary, so did many other senior people.
10:53 is the time, and those allegations of lying are, I mean, we'll find out shortly whether or not they have been in any way challenged or refuted. Refuted is the most misused word of the day. I don't know if you're noticing this. Refute means to disprove. It doesn't mean to deny. You refute something by proving that it's not true. Shaggy did not refute anything in his famous track, It Wasn't Me. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that one to make an appearance today either. But here he is being accused of, well, you can hear it for yourself.
I mean, there are numerous examples. I mean, in the summer, he said that everyone who needed treatment who got the treatment that they required. He knew that that was a lie, because he'd been briefed by the Chief Scientific Advisor and the Chief Medical Officer himself about the first peak, and we were told explicitly people did not get the treatment that they deserved. Many people were left to die in horrific circumstances.
Many people were left to die in horrific circumstances. Yeah, I love it because it upsets people like you and Sadiq Khan. Oh, I will be drinking those liberal tears tonight. Many people were left to die in horrific circumstances by your man, by your fella. And Hancock, it would appear, was a sort of handmaiden of death.
Nobody could find a way around the problem of the Prime Minister just like a shopping trolley smashing from one side of the aisle into the other.
We jumped ahead slightly there. Back to Hancock.
Hancock is interfering with the building of the test and trace system because he's telling everybody what to do to maximise his chances of hitting his stupid target by the end of the month. So we had half the government, with me and Number 10, calling around frantically saying, do not do what Hancock says. Build the thing properly for the medium term. And we had Hancock calling them all saying, down tools on this, do this, hold tests back so that I can hit my target. Now, in my opinion, he should have been fired for that thing alone. And that itself meant that the whole of April was hugely disrupted by different parts of Whitehall fundamentally trying to operate in different ways, completely because Hancock wanted to be able to go on TV and say, look at me, my 100k target.
And when he did that tearful little bit, which perhaps those of us still trying to shore up the idea that he might have been all right, may have paid a little bit more attention to. Theo will be with us imminently. So what should have happened to Matt Hancock, Dom?
I said sack him. I said sack him like almost every week, sometimes almost every day. He was told, though, that you should not sack him. You should keep him there because he's the person you fire when the inquiry comes along. I thought, my counter-argument to that was, if you leave him there, we're going to have another set of disasters in the autumn. And that's the critical thing. Forget the inquiry. The inquiry, God knows when that'll bloody happen. We've got to get rid of this guy now because every single week things are going disastrously wrong.
A bit inappropriate to be playing with his toy fire engine during that select committee hearing. Theo Ushwood is here. Has he addressed these accusations?
Matt Hancock has just spoken, but there's one more little excerpt from Dom Cummings in front of the MPs yesterday I want to play you because this is what Jonathan Ashworth, the Shadow Health Secretary's question, hinges on.
He came back after being ill. What on earth has happened with all of these people in care homes? Hancock told us in the cabinet room that people were going to be tested before they went back to care homes. What the hell happened? Now, all the government rhetoric was, we put a shield around care homes and blah, blah, blah. It was complete nonsense. Quite the opposite of putting a shield around them. We sent people with COVID back to the care homes.
That is incredible. I mean, we're sifting through smoking guns, but he claims that Matt Hancock lied about testing, and then we're back to that analogy of the siege with the plague-ridden bodies, which the Daily Telegraph doctor wrote about, being sort of catapulted over the ramparts of the castle to infect the population inside.
In March, Matt Hancock, and this is what Dominic Cummings said, gave a guarantee that people coming out of care homes and out of hospitals and into care homes were going to be tested. Matt Hancock summoned to the Commons. At first, he just tried to gloss over the urgent question from Jonathan Ashworth.
We have many challenges as a nation still to come. I know, and one of the things I've learned, is the best way through is to work together with a can-do spirit of positive collaboration.
Now, Jonathan Ashworth then focuses on a speech that Matt Hancock made in the Commons on May the 6th when he insisted that a protective shield had been thrown around care homes. And then, of course, Jonathan Ashworth is trying to potentially set Matt Hancock up for having breached the ministerial code.
Now, these allegations from Cummings are either true, and if so, the Secretary of State potentially stands in breach of the ministerial code and the Nolan principles, or they are false and the Prime Minister brought a fantasist and a liar into the heart of Downing Street. Which is it? Families who have lost loved ones deserve full answers from him today.
And of course, if it can be proven that Matt Hancock didn't tell the truth in the House of Commons, well, then Matt Hancock came out with this particular denial.
These allegations that were put yesterday and repeated by the Right Honourable Gentleman are serious allegations, and I welcome the opportunity to come to the House to put formally on the record that these unsubstantiated allegations around honesty are not true.
So he uses a catch-all phrase there around honesty, not addressing that specific question about
Did you say that they were all being tested before being sent back into care homes? Because they believed him, and that's why they introduced the policy for returns to care homes.
Yes, and of course the crux is, and this is where Jonathan Ashworth is trying to, and where he thinks Matt Hancock may have to resign, is trying to pin him down on that statement in the Commons on May the 6th, that he didn't tell the truth when he said that the government had thrown a protective shield around care homes.
So that was, I mean, politics by Shaggy once again. No specific denial of specific allegations, but a sort of broad catch-all attempt to...
Around honesty.
Around honesty in general. We had an interesting discussion yesterday about whether or not outside our bubble some of the things that we notice resonate as much as they do inside our bubble. And you were very drawn, more so than me, actually, and I think I was wrong, to the things that Johnson didn't deny. I'm reminded of it now, hearing that, and the 80-year-olds is a very interesting...
He didn't deny having said that, and there was the comment that came out before Dominic Cummings appeared in front of MPs that he'd said that he was prepared for, this disease, and this was on second lockdown, only kills 80-year-olds. He didn't deny that in the House of Commons, and of course he was asked about other aspects too, James, which again he didn't deny. The only actual specific question he did deny was when it came to the Cabinet Secretary telling him that he didn't think Matt Hancock was honest in his assertions around what he was updating Cabinet.
Do you know anything about Dehenna Davidson? The
North East MP won Red Bull's seat in the North East.
Oh, did she? She's a new arrival, is she?
New arrival, yes.
Yeah, she's the one with the Barnard Castle eye test chart behind her on her Cabinet Office questions appearance this morning.
Oh. That's
hilarious, I think, is the word you're looking for. Yeah. Inevitably, we continue to pore over Dominic Cummings' testimony to House of Commons Select Committees, Joint Select Committees yesterday. In the context of Matt Hancock, this is essentially how it breaks down. Here is the Secretary of State for Flags and Health in the House of Commons about 10 minutes ago.
Every day since I began working on the response to this pandemic last January, I've got up each morning and asked, what must I do to protect life? That is the job of a health secretary in a pandemic.
And here is the Prime Minister's most senior advisor at that time speaking yesterday.
I said repeatedly from February, March, if we don't fire the Secretary of State and if we don't get the testing into someone else's hands, we are going to kill people and it's going to be a catastrophe.
So, again, as one thing we said at the beginning of the week that I think has stood the test of time is that he's going to need receipts. If Cummings, that's a very weak denial from Matt Hancock, as Theo expertly explained, but if Cummings is going to make that accusation land, he's going to need some sort of record. And speaking of records, I feel I'm proving Mark's point about being more than happy to do the whole 3 hours today without taking a call, but let me just slide this in, okay? The Indian variant is now a potential problem, even to the point of seeing many public health experts express doubts or concerns about the June 21st loosening, the ending of lockdown on June the 21st. The Indian variant is potentially posing a threat to that plan. The Indian variant is here precisely because Boris Johnson still couldn't find any semblance of clarity and leadership when it was clear to almost everybody that India should be on the same red list as Pakistan and Bangladesh at the first opportunity. The Indian variant got in to the country over a year after this nightmare started, 120-odd thousand deaths into it, and Boris Johnson still fluffed it again, learnt nothing. That's incredible, actually. It became more incredible with every sentence of Dominic Cummings' testimony yesterday, because you would think, wouldn't you, people say, oh, well, after Cummings went, he really got a handle on lockdowns. There's some truth in that. The January seemed to be, once the absolute catastrophe of Christmas was out of the way, all caused by Johnson. You remember? It would be inhuman to cancel Christmas, folks. Cockatoo ergo sum. Unbelievable. And more deaths caused by that than probably any other individual political decision that he's taken since this began. And then the India variant popped up. So the vaccines, yes, I mean... The vaccines, the one thing that was ever going to save us from Boris Johnson, running around the country at a speed nobody would have dared to dream of. The only threat now to that June 21st escape day is the India variant. Why is the India variant on the march? Because he didn't shut down travel into this country from the subcontinent in time. You see why being proved right has never felt so wrong? This is just horrible. Utterly, utterly horrible. And I didn't even lose anyone. 8 minutes after 11 is the time. Lisa is in Bethnal Green. Lisa, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, God. Do you know what? I don't even know where to start.
Take all the time you want. Take all the time.
Yesterday, honestly. I lost both my parents within 5 days to COVID back in February. And I couldn't go to their funeral. I couldn't be with them when they died. And I can't get my head around how I managed to lose both of my parents within 5 days when these people are sat in government and we elect them in good faith to try and protect the most vulnerable during times of crisis. And that just didn't happen.
Do we? I mean, I don't know. I'm being a bit of a pillock, actually. I don't know that I've ever cast my vote in the sense that you describe. It's like an implicit expectation, isn't it, that the people in charge of the country will prioritise the health of the people living in the country above many, many other things.
Yeah, you would like to think so.
Yeah.
You know, and you put your faith in that when something major like this happens, you know, that they will follow the right advice and they will put the right things in place. And as you've just said, you know,
Lisa, it's a terrible phone line. I don't know what you've done since you spoke to the producer.
Sorry, it's not.
That's all right. It's a tough call.
The whole thing with the Indian variant is just appalling. It should never have been allowed to happen.
But it's Groundhog Day, right? But it's Groundhog Day with a fatal consequence.
It's Groundhog Day and playing Russian roulette with people's lives. Again. I mean, like the whole thing of releasing people from hospital into care homes, to my mind, is something almost... You could describe it as state-sponsored euthanasia. You know, what a way to deal with the social care policy.
And that's the denial, the failure to deny the lines about bodies piling high or people over eight. It's only 80-year-olds that are dying. I don't know how old your parents are, and it wouldn't be appropriate to ask you at this point, but the fact that he has so far failed to deny those specific allegations it's chilling, actually.
They're offensive. They're offensive to me. I mean, my parents were in their 70s, and they stayed at home. They did everything that was asked of them, and as I say, they both died within 5 days. My mum died at home, my dad died on a ventilator, and it's just absolutely shocking to me. And I see government whiteboards with who do we not save, and I hear you talking about MPs in Parliament with, you know, wallpapers on their Zoom calls with...
I'm double-checking that. It appears to be kosher. This is an MP called Dehenna Davidson in Bishop Auckland, the so-called Red Wall, who has appeared... on a Zoom meeting since coming to his testimony with a Barnard Castle eye chart behind her because, you know, nothing funnier is there than 127,000 deaths, tens of thousands of which caused by the incompetence of the Prime Minister, to whom she presumably bends the knee at every opportunity. Oh, I'm sorry, Lisa. I'm going to crack on because that phone line is awful, but I feel for you, and I'm so sorry for your double loss. Danielle's in Northampton. Danielle, what made you pick up the phone?
Hiya, James.
Hello.
I'm a first-time caller, so I'm a bit nervous.
You're very welcome.
I wanted to call because I do agree with what's happened, with what you're saying has happened in care homes, which I can see for myself because my father passed away on the 26th of April last year in his care home. We weren't notified for 2 hours until after his death, and he had a lung condition. He knew he was going to die. He knew that was going to happen. I was speaking to him daily. They locked down early and they still couldn't stop.
Do we know how it got into the care home? I hope that's not an inappropriate question.
No, this is from residents coming back into the care home from hospital.
And this is what Cummings says Matt Hancock told them that wasn't happening, that everyone was being tested before they went back in. And that seems to me to be one of the biggest elements of the last 24 hours.
That
Who's telling the truth?
Was happening. They were releasing residents back into the care home without being tested. My father was of a sound mind, but he had a lung condition.
Yes.
And I was speaking to him daily.
He was profoundly vulnerable then. I mean,
and he said a week before, the staff aren't coming in this room. And they knew that it would get him, but equally they were so short-staffed. They were hiring in agency staff. There wasn't sufficient PPE. there was multiple factors, but if the virus hadn't got in there in the first place from the hospital, then, you know, things could have been very different. But to get a phone call 2 hours after and then be the one that has to call your 7 siblings.
Oh, Lord.
When your father raised you all on his own, he should never have died on his own.
Oh, Danielle.
And I think it is a stubbornness from many people now where they just don't want to back down. It's almost like a pride thing. We can't now say that they've done a bad job, so we're gonna stick to this, and it is absolutely sickening.
Well, you say it's sickening, and I wouldn't expect you to muster up any sympathy for some of these ghouls, but for some people, it's almost as if the truth is now too terrifying. It's not as if they're not members of a personality cult, or they're not.
No.
They just think, crikey, I helped cause this. I helped contribute to this. I thought he was a stand-up guy. I thought he was a good man. I thought they're both of them. I mean, I'm not letting Cummings off any hooks at all. I don't think anybody should. No. He put Johnson at the peak of the party, and from the peak of the party to the premiership, it was Cummings. He was the architect of this power grab. And I guess if you were part of it, then you would feel, I don't know, you'd rather not ever think about it again, Danielle, probably.
Yeah. Yes, I think so. But people have to remember that families haven't been able to grieve, and it doesn't. It's a worry that now we're looking at potentially an Indian variant taking over again a year.
Well, I mean, the vaccine. It's a race now between the Indian variant and the vaccines, and if the vaccines win the race, then they'll do what they always do and claim that it's a result of brilliant politics and policy making and brave leadership. But we know the truth. It's a gamble. He's gambled our lives again, like he gambled your dad's, Danielle. And I don't know why. I've spoken to so many people who've been bereaved since the beginning of last year. But yesterday and today, I know you should never get blasé or get used to it, but yesterday and today it's really getting under my armour. I just hear it in your voices, and now we know with close to 100% certainty that many of these parents, many of these mums and dads and granddads and grandmas and brothers and sisters and husbands and wives, many of them would still be with us today if, and I'll tell you what Dominic Cummings said, perhaps tallies with what I think, if in December of 2019 there had been an opportunity to put somebody even half competent in charge of this country. Just one day off from the usual programme, the usual cut and thrust. I won't be rowing with people who think that there's nothing wrong with presiding over tens of thousands of unnecessary deaths because Brexit or vaccines or whatever it may be. Neither will I be rowing with people who are pretending that Dominic Cummings is being sort of recast as entirely trustworthy by those of us chilled by his testimony yesterday. The man is more responsible for introducing abject lies into the public bloodstream than anybody else outside Parliament. The adverts that were punted into your granny's Facebook feed in the last week of the referendum campaign were rancid, absolutely rancid, and in his own view made the difference between getting it over the line and not getting it over the line. And, of course, the foundations of falsehood, the foundation stones of falsehood upon which Brexit was built, then saw Boris Johnson's premiership be built like an extra story on top of that. So you start with the Brexit lies, you get over the line in the referendum. You leave the lies unchallenged. You have people in my profession still pretending that they don't now know it was a terrible mistake, and the people responsible for those lies move on to the next stage. The next stage, it turned out, none of us saw this coming, was a global pandemic. And having the liars in charge, both of them, I don't care about Cummings' apologies, he's got blood on his hands as well, because he put Boris Johnson in charge. It's ridiculous to suggest, oh, sorry lads, nothing to do with me, I just built the car and put Boris Johnson in the driving seat. It's not my fault he then ploughed it into a bus queue full of people. Yes, it is, mate, completely. That's between you and your conscience, if you have one. And that's where we are today. So one day off from talking to people who are so far down the rabbit hole that they somehow end up cheering the death of their neighbours and family members because, I don't know anymore. What, it upsets you and Sadiq Khan? Brexit means Brexit? Barnard Castle eye charts on the wall behind you on a Zoom call as a serving member of the Parliament? I don't know. So 1 day off. With no apologies. 20 minutes after 10 is the time. Mystery hour at 12, of course. 20 minutes after 11 even is the time. Time is going quickly. But Mystery hour, I think, will be a necessary relief at 12 noon. Tony's in Glasgow. Tony, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
So in relation to this story, I mean, it's gut-wrenching to hear all the stories from people where their beloved ones have passed away in care homes.
Yes.
Now, I think it's important to find out and get to the bottom of what's happened in terms of the advice being given to the health secretary. Now, it's either Matt Hancock lied and said something that wasn't true, or he's been given the wrong advice from the officials. And as far as I'm concerned, this is a criminal offence because tens of thousands of people passed away.
Well, we just spoke to one of them, didn't we? And you know, the conviction that these people caught it as a result of infected patients coming back into care homes from hospitals is I mean, you say a criminal offence. I don't know the law well enough to fully endorse that suggestion, but it certainly feels like a crime, doesn't it?
Yes. And I think the civil service should actually action a review and an investigation into this to find out what happened from a civil service point of view, official point of view.
Are you in the civil service? Well, you may not be allowed to tell me, but is this a world you know, Tony?
Yes.
Okay, so that you'd expect some sort of paper trail, but the accusation is conversational. Hancock walked into the office and said, we're testing them before we send them back into homes. I can't imagine a cabinet secretary ever getting involved in a he said, she said like that. I don't know. I can't imagine Hancock suing Cummings for libel, which is what it would be if it were untrue. And Cummings, unless he's got documentary evidence of it, couldn't prove it beyond all reasonable doubt, could he? So we're probably going to be in classic Boris Johnson territory, where you pretend it isn't happening, wait until it blows away, and then pretend it never happened.
Well, I'd be surprised if there isn't a paper trail, because a normal process would follow that officials give advice to ministers and ministers decide. So in matters of such a magnitude as the one we're talking about, I'll be surprised that no advice has been going to the health.
But even if you can find the advice, you can't find the proof that Hancock said to them privately in a room, we're testing them before we send them into care homes.
If the response was on a verbal basis, then yes.
I mean, I'm just pointing out problems. I'm being a bit of a pain in the proverbials, but I mean, even if there is documentary evidence that Hancock did or didn't receive that advice, I don't know I mean, I made jokes last week. I'm not making any jokes today about Cummings having James Bond style technology. Looks like the kind of fellow who'd have a little recording device built into his big biro, and I wouldn't be surprised if he'd pressed record on his phone in certain contexts. I still wouldn't, for what it's worth, but unless he did, then we would struggle to get, you're talking about crimes, then you'd struggle to get over the threshold of evidence, I suspect. But it is, as you say, clearly a chain that needs to be properly examined. 24 minutes after 11. Thank you, Tony. Back to the tape, I think, briefly. It is that, you know, what were our phrases? What were the most... I mean, you know, if you're somebody who doesn't enjoy me hitting nails on the head on a daily basis, what was the nail that annoyed you most over the last year? Here's Sean in Stratford-upon-Avon. Been listening to you for a year now, every day, and I still disagree with almost everything you say. You have an agenda, and people seem to take it all in and believe every single word you say. Well, don't listen to me, mate. Listen to Dominic Cummings addressing almost directly the absence of clarity and leadership that we have bemoaned since, February of 2020? Certainly March. Here's Dominic Cummings on very, very similar territory.
And the Prime Minister said, which I think says a lot, he laughed and he said, you're right, I am more frightened of you having the power to stop the chaos than I am of the chaos. Chaos isn't that bad. Chaos means that everyone has to look to me to see who's in charge. And I think that was just a fundamental problem. It was a fundamental problem in our relationship, and it was a fundamental problem in how Number 10 was governed, and it was one of the reasons why I said in July that I was going to leave. In all sorts of ways, I probably should have left then in the summer.
So not just an absence of clarity and leadership, but an actual preference for chaos. There are also various occasions, I've got them all here, of where Dominic Cummings described yesterday, and again, believe him or don't believe him, but don't let anybody tell you that he didn't answer these questions, why he didn't leave earlier. I had two reasons, essentially. The first was that he wanted to be there to try and steer this wonky trolley that he kept describing. He felt, rightly or wrongly, that things would be even worse without him being there to counsel and caution the Prime Minister. And that causes one of the fig leaves that people will attempt to present to you. The idea, oh, well, if it was so awful, why didn't he resign sooner? His answer to that question, for what it's worth, is, well, it would be pretty bad when I was there. It would have been a hell of a lot worse if I wasn't. And I don't know how compelling you find that. It's entirely up to you. And I think we're just to stress that point about the shopping trolley. I missed it, actually. It was a tweet I got. Rachel Johnson, Boris's sister and LBC colleague, replied to something I'd said. And that trolley point had sort of passed me by yesterday.
Nobody could find a way around the problem of the Prime Minister just like a shopping trolley smashing from one side of the aisle into the other.
And that is the defence as to why didn't he resign sooner. And he obviously regrets not having done kind of public, or he says he regrets not having done public ultimatums. Why didn't you resign sooner? Because the Prime Minister was a shopping trolley smashing from one aisle to the other, and I thought it might cause less damage if I kept my hand on it. 11:27 is the time. Let's go to Alan, who's in Leeds. Alan, what would you like to say?
Hi, I've just been saying to your producers I'm going to have to moderate my language slightly because
you and me both. You and me both, Alan.
And it's a struggle, isn't it?
Yes.
So the thing that is there's so much of this story that's making me more furious than I've ever been in my entire life. I worked through the pandemic. I'm an A&E doctor. I've been there since the start of this, and I've seen the effect that the poor decisions have had on people, their families. I was calling people, you know, in the first 6 months, every day, multiple times a day, to tell them that their family members were not coming home. And I think the thing about this that is really upsetting is it shouldn't have taken Dominic Cummings coming out yesterday to say there's been a problem here.
I'll tell you what, Alan, you did your job. It was our job. It was the job of journalism to do what Dominic Cummings did yesterday, and we failed. We failed the nation.
But also, and I think this is what's making me really upset about this, the nation is failing itself in not holding these people to account. We know Matt Hancock. We've got proof that he has already been lying to us for a year. He's got shares in his sister's company that has been given a contract that's not gone out to tender. The process by which PPE was given to companies who have, you know, a direct link to members of the Tory party, and then they failed to get that to us. The test and trace system that didn't work. Where is the accountability for any of this stuff? There is a
court case, as you probably know. There is a court case unfolding at the moment. We'll keep the very.
How is this guy still in a job?
And I just need to clarify that we don't have proof that he's lied to the country. I don't think.
Right, no, fair enough.
No, thank you. But you can say not yet if you want.
Not yet. Yeah. But I think the issue I've got with this is, you know, if I had performed as badly in my job, or there were question marks over my performance, I would currently, you know, be suspended. I would be awaiting.
Same here, actually.
Yeah, and how is it that we are told we have to follow a certain amount of rules, and yet the people who are governing us, the people who are in charge of my daily life at work, do not have to stick to the same levels of accountability as everyone else.
Yeah. But this isn't new or unique to the coronavirus. I think there were consequences, certainly when there was an independent advisor on ministerial standards. If he submitted a report to the Prime Minister explaining that for example, off the top of my head, Alan, the Home Secretary had bullied colleagues, then the Home Secretary would resign. But we have created a country, as you allude to, in which it's the independent advisor on ministerial standards that resigns, because the Prime Minister has chosen to ignore the report into a Home Secretary who was fired by the last Prime Minister for lying about secret meetings with a foreign government. I sometimes think I'm going mad when I see it as all being part of a bigger picture. But I sense you see, when you talk about the country letting itself down, you also talk about an issue, a crisis, a tragedy that's much, much bigger than simply the events of the last 24 hours or 18 months or 5 years.
Yeah, and the fact that, for example, we have, and I, woke up yesterday knowing that this was all breaking, and we're talking about an Italian Eurovision singer who may or may not have sniffed cocaine because he bent over a table.
Again, I'm conscious of being a bit of a legal eagle this morning. It has now been established that he didn't take cocaine.
Exactly.
He's taken a drugs test, but it's not
the top of the BBC News.
I don't know that it was the top of the BBC News, and I'm not here to defend the BBC at every turn. I'm conscious of why people like Robert Jenrick would like to avoid the sort of tough and proper questioning that I heard him exposed to on the BBC this morning, why the government has got the BBC at their sides. But it's not, no one has an unleavened diet. You don't just have meat at your Sunday lunch, Alan. You have potatoes, cauliflower cheese and Yorkshire pudding as well. So there's going to be some light-hearted. I think the front page of The Sun yesterday featuring Nick Knowles was probably a better example of what you're describing than the BBC covering some Eurovision tittle-tattle.
But it's so, sorry, don't get me wrong, this is not criticism of BBC. This is the fact that the top read story, selected the top read story in the UK, because people are clicking on it, is that story. It's not the fact that there is a huge governmental failure. And please don't get me wrong, I'm not criticising the BBC at all. They can't influence the fact that people are more interested in kind of fluff pieces than they are in things that are affecting their...
You're absolutely right. No, you are right. And I'm largely wrong. I was just pointing out sometimes, because I'll be doing Mystery Hour at 12, so you could come on another phone and you could ring up the BBC saying, that cretin on LBC is doing bloody Mystery Hour. There's 130,000, but you understand the point that I'm making.
I do.
I'm thankful to you, and everybody listening will be thankful to you and all of your colleagues in the NHS for not just doing this astonishing work that you've done, but doing it, as we increasingly learn, in the face of political leadership that could not have been designed to make it harder for you.
Yeah. And, that was fairly apparent.
Unbelievable.
I remember the PPE debacle, and I think what's worrying for me is that this is going to fade from public consciousness quickly.
That's what they'll be praying for, and that's why your revision points land a little, isn't it? Because nothing to see here. Everybody move along. He's done a great job. He's done the best he can. Up with vaccines. Brexit. Something. Don't mention the deaths. Don't mention the lies. Don't mention the incompetence. Don't mention the carelessness. Don't mention the callousness. Don't mention whatever you do. Don't mention the fact that it kept happening again and again and again and again. And please, God, don't mention that it's still happening now. The India variant should have seen India stuck on the red list at the first opportunity. France is now telling us that we will have to quarantine if we go there because of the India variant. We didn't tell India that until it was already far too late. And Speaker Hoyle had to, of course, remind MPs that you're not allowed under parliamentary decorum, parliamentary etiquette. You're not allowed to accuse other MPs of lying in Parliament. So quite a lot of you, Julian Suffolk, pointing out that claiming that a protective ring had been thrown around care homes. The problem is, Julie, that if they thought it was true when they said it, it's not actually a lie. This is one of the banes of my existence, is if you report or say something that is based upon claims, and the claims subsequently turn out not to be true, then having reported the claims in the first place doesn't make you complicit in the dishonesty. And obviously everybody sensible and honest understands that, but we live in an era where it's very lucrative to pretend not to understand things. But so if they knew that a protective ring hadn't been thrown around care homes when they said that it had, it's a lie. if they thought that a protective ring had been thrown around care homes, but it hadn't, it's not actually a lie. And that's the problem, I guess, with the absence of receipts or documentary evidence. We won't know what is and what is not a lie, as opposed to mistakes, errors, misspeaks. I don't know that we ever will in some cases. 11:39 is the time. John's in Edgware. John, what made you pick up the phone today?
Hi, James. We've spoken before. My daughter, Susan, died on the 28th of March last year.
I remember.
And since then, I have struggled to understand the lunacy, the complete lunacy. I've bought the book, Failures of State, the COVID-19 catastrophe. I've tried to find out how in the hell could we get in this such a mess. And Dominic Cummings, he's not my favourite person by any stretch of the imagination, but he done me a favour yesterday.
Do you feel that?
He put a lot of he ticked a lot of boxes. He made some sense of the nonsense, if you can understand what I'm saying. Because
I don't just understand it, John. I feel every word of it.
Never look for logic where logic doesn't exist. And I've been looking all these months, this 15, 16 months, crying every day. My wife crying every day because of the loss of our daughter, trying to understand why is my daughter dead. And now I know, and I've always believed. I mean, at the end of the day, the definition of herding immunity is a matter of semantics. Yeah. At the end of the day, what you can't do is you can't put your finger back in the dike 1 second, 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day after you've taken the bloody thing out. And at the end of the day, that's what Johnson did, because Johnson didn't take the pandemic seriously. He refused to take it seriously. He refused to arrive at COBRA meetings. He went on a fortnight's holiday. And for me, Cummings did me a favour yesterday. He did me a big favour, because what he's done is given me the peace of mind of knowing my many, many hours and many, many months of deliberation as to why my daughter, and I'm looking at her bush now, sitting in my garden. Why is she dead? And I know that she is gone mainly because of the incompetence of Johnson and his refusal to accept the serious nature of this pandemic. And I will never, ever forgive him, ever in my life, or any member of his catastocracy. I will never forgive them.
And oh, mate, you felt yesterday for the first time. I completely understand why you're at pains to stress the low regard in which you hold Dominic Cummings, but you felt, and Susan's mum felt yesterday for the first time, that you perhaps had come to understand how it happened.
Yeah, as far as I was concerned, he was telling the truth as he understood it, and his truth, just by coincidence, happens to be my truth, because I firmly believed from the word go that Johnson never took it seriously. Let's be honest, he bragged about shaking hands with he went on morning television on ITV talking about herding immunity, let's get it right. At the end of, the whole thing, the man is a complete menace. The man is a menace, and he doesn't care. And you have to remember as well, when in his mentality and in the Conservative Party mentality, my daughter Susan had Down syndrome. She was disabled.
I remember.
And before the pandemic came, there were 130 Oxford academics, investigated 130,000 premature deaths of mainly disabled people that were a result of Tory Conservative Party policies. So at the end of the day, the pandemic is, many of them are probably saying, well, we killed 130,000 before, what's another 130,000 now? You know what I mean? At the end of the day, I just despair of the people of this country that they watched all these thousands of people die and they don't care. and they just don't care.
You know me, mate. I can start an argument in an empty room, but I'm not going to.
I know you can.
I'm not going to argue with you about that.
I know you can, James.
I'd like to comfort you. People just need help understanding why they should care. They do care. They can't hear you now. Even the most boneheaded, cap-doffing, forelock-tugging sycophant cannot hear you now and not be moved. It's just a question of why so much effort is put into defending these people.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, at the end of the day, the worst thing has been dealing with. I mean, I know I listen to you all the time. I mean, but I don't get on the phone because my cancer triggers off if I get stressed.
I know.
And the thing about it is, I sat and watched that Hancock, and I know he's lying. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm nearly 79 years of age. I've been around a little bit, and I think we know a liar when we see a liar. And at the end of the day, as far as I'm concerned, when he turns around and says he threw his arms around the shield around the nursing homes, and he did this and he did, and he argued that I'll never forget the day that the nurse was crying her eyes out, saying that we were even told we've got to share a mask in a hospital. And that same day, Hancock was on the television telling us that there was no shortage of PPE in the hospitals. He was more or less calling that nurse a liar. So, you know what I mean? I'm not going to take no more of your time, and I'm grateful for
John,
your time.
I'm worried about your stress levels now.
No. I'll calm down on him. You know, at the end of the day,
can I say one thing just to you, and very briefly, because it's the least important bit of our exchange. But I just want to say sorry to you for the times that you've tuned into this programme and heard me defending or sticking up for Matt Hancock. I'm really, really sorry for that.
No, mate, no. We've all got a right to an opinion, and we learn, don't we? And at the end of the day, it's the same as everything.
Of course,
I mean, all right, Cummings has told lies, but he's also told truth.
Yes.
So you can't condemn everything Cummings says as a lie, and that's exactly what the Sun,
point, isn't it?
It's
not all or nothing, a binary, a zero-sum game. You're 100% one way or 100% the other.
Exactly.
That's just not
at
human.
the end of the day. And I think the one thing that came out of yesterday, more importantly than anything more than anything else, is that the absolute need for an inquiry now.
Yeah.
Not in a year's time, an inquiry now, because at the end of the day, one thing we all know in our hearts, that the lunatics are running the asylum at the moment. And the fact of the matter is, we could have another bloody pandemic at the end of this month. Do you know what I mean? We can't afford to wait a year. Do you know what I mean? If we had somebody with half a brain running the country, do you know what I mean? I never call him Prime Minister because I think it's an insult to the name. But that's what we need. We need an inquiry now. Us families, us loved ones, all of us families.
It's the very, very least you deserve, isn't it?
Yeah,
actually,
exactly that.
Because you're reduced to a vengeful, vendetta-driven former senior advisor giving vitriolic testimony to a select committee to get answers to the most profound and the most powerful questions of your life, and you're reduced to tuning into a pantomime like that rather than having a full and frank independent inquiry.
Every minute of that, I rewound. Nearly 9 hours I was listening to that.
Lord.
Keep rewinding it. Listen to what he said again. You know what I mean? Because I wanted to be sure what he said. I wanted to understand what he said because it's so important to me. I mean, 9 hours is nothing. I mean, I have desperately needed the answers, and for me, he gave me the answers yesterday. And the simple answer is by Johnson's actions, by his refusal to accept the seriousness of the pandemic, he took his finger out of that dike, and there's no bloody way he could put it back. And it's as simple as easy as that.
I hear you.
You know what I mean? And you vaccinate, using the word vaccination does not wipe away all those 150,000 people that are dead. You know what I mean? And that's what they're trying to do. Just every time they open their mouth, it's vaccination, vaccination, vaccination.
Yeah, you're right.
Never about death, death, death. Thank you for your time.
Before you go.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm going to struggle to say this. I bet you were a brilliant dad.
Oh, God. Do you know, Saint? She was 56 years old. She was a bundle of fun. I called her Little Chief, and she called me Big Chief. And everybody knew her as Susie Wong. She was just the loveliest person in the world, and she didn't deserve. None of these people deserved it. None of these people deserved, a time of crisis when we desperately needed a really serious politician in charge of Downing Street. We sadly finished up with a charlatan and a narcissist and a liar. And that's why my daughter is dead, and that's why all these... I feel for all of these families. Every single family, my heart goes out to them. And when I see it every day and people turn around and say, oh, there's only 9 dead today, or it's only... That's somebody's loved one. Yeah. It's not only 2, it's not only 9, it's not only 1. It's somebody's loved one that's died. And people are in pain. And people should remember that. And they should remember that the next time they go to put their cross in a box, in a boat, in a polling station. Because this man isn't fit to run the country. End of story. I'm going to go. God bless and be well.
God, you look after yourself, mate. John.
Yeah, God bless.
We'll talk again. God bless you.
Bye.
And love to Susie's mum as well. I need to take a break. An awful lot of love coming in for John, who I think was all right, I think, until he did the nicknames. And every dad, possibly with a daughter, has something similar in their own life. And that shared humanity, John, that you expressed, and even after what you've been through, the clear care and concern that you have for other people, mate, you're an inspiration to every single one of us, even perhaps the people who don't realise it yet. Oh boy, 11:55 is the time, and thankfully Ben Kentish is here with a scoopette that he can deliver to you without any help or assistance from me, because I am still in a bit of a state. Ben.
Well, James, Matt Hancock in the House of Commons today obviously was there to combat some of the allegations that Dominic Cummings made, allegations as serious as suggesting the Health Secretary had lied. So it was going to be the case, inevitably, that everything he said was going to be quite closely scrutinised. And there's one claim in particular that he made in the Commons that really raises some questions, shall we say. Now, firstly, important to say, I have asked the Department of Health for clarity on this. I've asked them to provide some sort of answer. I'll let you know if they come back to me. But this was the claim. It was in response to a question from Labour MP Yasmin Qureshi. And, James, it's worth listening to exactly what the Health Secretary said about Bolton.
What I would say to the people of Bolton is that the people of Bolton have, again, risen to this challenge. The number of vaccinations happening in Bolton right now is phenomenal, tens of thousands every single day. And it is heartening to see the queues of people coming forward, both for testing and for vaccinations in Bolton. This has not been an easy pandemic anywhere, but it's been especially difficult in Bolton. And I, in particular, want to pay tribute to the leadership of Bolton Council and Councillor David Greenall, who's done such a remarkable job in very difficult circumstances.
James, it's worth hearing just a little bit of that again. It was the bit where Matt Hancock talked about just how many vaccinations are being delivered in Bolton.
The number of vaccinations happening in Bolton right now is phenomenal, tens of thousands every single day.
Now, tens of thousands a day, James, sounded a lot to me, because the population of Bolton is only 300,000.
You're a cynical soul, Ben Kentish, aren't you?
So you could have vaccinated, if that figure was correct, the entire town in a matter of less than a week or so. Well, I've checked the official figures, James. The official figures show, or suggest at least, that the official number of doses given in Bolton over the last week averages 2,604 a day. Over the last fortnight, it's 3,073 a day. And over the last month, it's 2,459 a day. Now, the most that were given in the last fortnight was 4,965. So it's very, very difficult to see how you get even close to Matt Hancock's claims that there were tens of thousands being delivered every single day. Now, I'd love to offer some sort of explanation, James. I can't. That's why we've asked the Department for Health if they can point us to some sort of other data set. But just to reiterate, those figures I just gave you are from the official NHS government figures that are published every day on the government dashboard.
Well spotted, Ben Kentish, as ever. And more questions for Matt Hancock to answer. That councillor, of course, is the one that somehow managed to confirm that the Friday soft release of the 8 areas that needed to take special measures had come as a complete surprise to him, while somehow simultaneously trying to defend the government responsible for the mess. So arguably he's getting his reward there. From Ben Kentish to Theo Usherwood with the final bit of politics before Mystery Hour.
Yesterday, it emerged that Boris Johnson had said that it was trying to resist a second lockdown by saying that COVID-19 was only killing 80-year-olds. That's just been put to him in the last hour, and he didn't deny that specific claim.
This has been an incredibly difficult series of decisions, none of which we've taken lightly. And you've got to recognise, and I hope people do understand this, that when you go into a lockdown, it's a very, very painful, a traumatic thing for people, for people's mental health, for their lives, and their livelihoods. And of course, you've got to set that against the horrors of the pandemic and of COVID. And at every stage, we've been governed by a determination to protect life, to save life, to ensure that our NHS is not overwhelmed, and we've followed to the best we can the data and the guidance that we've had. And what we're doing now is still following the data, still looking very carefully at where we're going, looking at what's happening with the new variant.
So I'm sorry, mate. I listened to all of that. Part of me was thinking, I'm sorry, John, that I had to play that out on the programme, mate. I really am. But did he answer the question about the 80 people in their 80s?
But he's saying he defended delaying the decision on a second lockdown.
Yes.
Of course, Dominic Cummings said yesterday that Boris Johnson compared himself to the mayor in Jaws when he refers to the first lockdown, wishing that he hadn't closed the beaches.
But did he deny saying the thing about only people?
No, he didn't. No, he didn't.
That's the second time he's failed to deny it.
Yeah.
Which suggests he thinks Cummings has got receipts on this one.
Well, you have to ask why he's failed to deny it, said the opportunist.
Toxic.